which I had set to myself, difficult to accomplish. You spoke of my mood just now. Well, we will call it that, if you will. I wished to speak with you because I was in trouble and had need of your sympathy." "It is yours to command, madame." "How cold you are," she sighed. "Faith, I can scarce believe that but a few months ago one tear in my eye had set you well nigh crazy. Now I come to you with a half-broken heart, and... "I pray you, madame," he said, whilst his voice shook almost as much as hers, "in what way can I serve you?" "Percy, Armand is in deadly danger. A letter of his, rash, impetuous as were all his actions, and written to Sir Andrew Ffoulkes, has fallen into the hands of a fanatic. Armand is hopelessly compromised. Tomorrow, perhaps, he will be arrested. After that, the guillotine. Unless... Oh, it is horrible!" she said with a sudden wail of anguish, as all the events of the past night came rushing back to her mind. "Horrible! And you do not understand. You cannot. And I have no one to whom I can turn for help, or even for sympathy." Tears now refused to be held back. All her trouble, her struggles, the awful certainty of Armand's fate overwhelmed her. She tottered, ready to fall, and leaning against the stone balustrade, she buried her face in her hands and sobbed bitterly. At first mention of Armand St. Just's name, and of the peril in which he stood, Sir Percy's face had become a shade more pale, and the look of determination and obstinacy appeared more marked than ever between his eyes. However, he said nothing for the moment, but watched her, as her delicate frame was shaken with sobs, watched her until unconsciously his face softened, and what looked almost like tears seemed to glisten in his eyes. "And so," he said with bitter sarcasm, "the murderous dog of the Revolution is turning upon the very hands that fed it? Begad, madame," he added very gently, as Marguerite continued to sob hysterically, "will you dry your tears? I never could bear to see a pretty woman cry, and I..." Instinctively, with sudden overmastering passion at the sight of her helplessness and of her grief, he stretched out his arms, and the next would have seized her and held her to him, protected from every evil with his very life, his very heart's blood. But pride had the better of it in this struggle once again. He restrained himself with a tremendous effort of will, and said coldly, though still very gently, "Will you not turn to me, madame, and tell me in what way I may have the honour to serve you?" She made a violent effort to control herself, and turning her tear-stained face to him, she once more held out her hand, which he kissed with the same punctilious gallantry. But Marguerite's fingers this time lingered in his hand for a second or two longer than was absolutely necessary, and this was because she had felt that his hand trembled perceptibly and was burning hot, whilst his lips felt as cold as marble. "Can you do aught for Armand?" she said sweetly and simply. "You have so much influence at court, so many friends." "Nay, madame. Should you not seek the influence of your French friend, Monsieur Chauvelin? His extends, if I mistake not, even as far as the Republican government of France." "I cannot ask him, Percy. Oh, I wish I dared to tell you. But he has put a price on my brother's head, which..." She would have given worlds if she had felt the courage then to tell him everything. All she had done that night, how she had suffered, and how her hand had been forced. But she dared not give way to that impulse. Not now, when she was just beginning to feel that he still loved her, when she hoped that she could win him back. She dared not make another confession to him. After all, he might not understand. He might not sympathize with her struggles and temptation. His love still dormant might sleep the sleep of death. Perhaps he divined what was passing in her mind. His whole attitude was one of intense longing, a veritable prayer for that confidence which her foolish pride withheld from him. When she remained silent, he sighed, and said with marked coldness, "Faith, madame, since it distresses you, we will not speak of it. As for Armand, I pray you have no fear. I pledge you my word that he shall be safe. Now have I your permission to go? The hour is getting late, and..." "You will at least accept my gratitude?" she said, as she drew quite close to him, and speaking with real tenderness. With a quick, almost involuntary effort he would have taken her then in his arms, for her eyes were swimming with tears which he longed to kiss away. But she had lured him once, just like this, then cast him aside like an ill-fitting glove. He thought this was but a mood, a caprice, and he was too proud to lend himself to it once again. "It is too soon, madame," he said quietly. "I have done nothing as yet. The hour is late, and you must be fatigued. Your women will be waiting for you upstairs." He stood aside to allow her to pass. She sighed, a quick sigh of disappointment. His pride and her beauty had been in direct conflict, and his pride had remained the conqueror. Perhaps, after all, she had been deceived just now. What she took to be the light of love in his eyes might only have been the passion of pride, or, who knows, of hatred instead of love. She stood looking at him for a moment or two longer. He was again as rigid, as impassive as before. Pride had conquered, and he cared naught for her. The grey light of dawn was gradually yielding to the rosy light of the rising sun. Birds began to twitter. Nature awakened, smiling in happy response to the warmth of this glorious October morning. Only between these two hearts there lay a strong, impassable barrier, built up of pride on both sides, which neither of them cared to be the first to demolish. He had bent his tall figure in a low, ceremonious bow as she finally, with another bitter little sigh, began to mount the terrace steps. The long train of her gold-embroidered gown swept the dead leaves off the steps, making a faint, harmonious sh, 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 as she glided up, with one hand resting on the balustrade, the rosy light of dawn making an aureole of gold round her hair, and causing the rubies on her head and arms to sparkle. She reached the tall glass doors which led into the house. Before entering, she paused once again to look at him, hoping against hope to see his arms stretched out to her, and to hear his voice calling her back. But he had not moved. His massive figure looked the very personification of unbending pride, of fierce obstinacy. Hot tears again surged to her eyes. As she would not let him see them, she turned quickly within, and ran as fast as she could up to her own rooms. Had she but turned back then and looked out once more onto the rose-lit garden, she would have seen that which would have made her own suffering seem but light and easy to bear. A strong man, overwhelmed with his own passion and his own despair. Pride had given way at last. Obstinacy was gone. The will was powerless. He was but a man, madly, blindly, passionately in love, and as soon as her light footsteps had died away within the house, he knelt down upon the terrace steps, and in the very madness of his love he kissed, one by one, the places where her small foot had trodden, and the stone balustrade there where her tiny hand had rested last. End of chapter 16.